Welcome to lecture for Psych 350. We'll be talking about the behavior slash social learning approach to understanding personality. Start off with kind of an overview of the behaviorist view. One, it like many other things, it was a reaction to the psychodynamic theory, and really people who weren't comfortable with some of the concepts in Freudian and Neo-Freudian theories regarding the unconscious and all these things that you couldn't observe, that people were theorizing about, that couldn't be studied directly. This really made some people really uncomfortable. They felt that it wasn't whether or not the theory was accurate. It certainly didn't seem scientific, and so largely the drive for toward the behaviorist view was academic psychologists who wanted a view of personality that they could study using these kind of emerging methods of behavior science. So the focus clearly then was on observable behaviors. Let's not talk about id and ego. And for people like Watson, he said, well, of course you're going to talk about behavior because that's all there is. There is no such thing as cognition. Cognition is just a behavior too. There are no internal events. They're all things that can be observable. You just have to have the right tools to observe them. So a big influence on observable behaviors. So we're not going to talk about your instincts or your drives, or internal conflicts, and wanting to kill your father or your mother, those types of things. Just kind of what do people do, right? And another kind of big part of that is what they do is influenced by their environment. So experience is what influences behavior. So it's not so much what you're born with, either in terms of genetics or archetypes, to address kind of Jungian stuff. But anything you do can be understood by the sum total of all the experiences you've had to that point. So when we get to talking about personality, different personalities come from different experiences. In the degree to which that anybody will have stability of personality, which would be, for behavior, stability of behavioral tendencies, would correspond to the degree to which they had stability in their environment, right, where they got consistently the same type of rewards or punishments in modeling experiences regarding a certain behavior. Then, yeah, it'll be stable. But if it's all over the place, then it won't be so stable. It won't be kind of a consistent part of your personality per se. Okay, the big ideas we'll talk about. We'll talk about the conditioning theories, classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and then the social learning theories, which really expanded upon initial behaviorist thinking. So, starting off with classical conditioning, which hopefully most of you are familiar with from intro psych classes. Obviously, the person we're going to talk about here is Ivan Pavlov, Russian, not a psychologist, but somebody who was studying, dog digestion, and was having, dogs measuring their spit to look at how different things affected the way dogs digest their food. But surreptitiously discovered some of these principles of learning behavior because he found that you had these apparati to collect dog spit, and he would use meat powder. He would inject meat powder into their mouths to get them to spit, and then he could collect it. But he found that they would start salivating before he did the meat powder. Like, not the first time, but after doing the meat powder a couple times, whenever they would maybe hear him open the door or hear his shoes cross the floor, some signal in that environment before the meat powder got there, these dogs would start salivating. And he said, that's interesting. At first he's like, they're screwing up my experiment. But then he's like, hey, this is interesting. They've learned, right? Learning has occurred here. Let's figure this out. And so he did some more experiments on this and started to discover these rules about stimulus-response associations. Right? So things like looking at the relationship between stimuli and responses. So generally, he was interested in classical conditioning. You're looking at where you have some unconditioned stimulus that elicits an unconditioned response. So, for example, we have here in this chart, you put lemon juice in your mouth, it'll lead to salivation. It's a biological process. You don't have to learn to do that. The first time everybody does this, that will happen. Unless they have some sort of salivary gland disease, I guess. But in general, it's an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response. No learning takes place. It's a biological, physiological thing that just happens automatically. Right? And then with conditioning, you present some other stimulus, which becomes the conditioned stimulus. In this example, a bell, right before you present the lemon juice. So before you do this, the bell is a neutral stimulus, right? So we ring the bell, and you don't salivate. Okay, it's a bell. What are you doing with that bell? That's weird. But if we continue to ring the bell, and then very soon after introduce lemon juice to your mouth, you'll salivate. And at this point, you're not salivating because of the bell, right? You're salivating because of the lemon juice. But if we repeatedly pair those two stimuli, the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, which originally it's again the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, do that enough times, then eventually we can do the bell by itself. And then if it elicits salivation, now it's become the conditioned stimulus. And now salivation without the lemon juice being there, without the unconditioned stimulus, salivation is now a conditioned response. Right? And the whole idea behind this is that at a very kind of basic level, the bell is a signal to the body that the lemon juice is coming. So the body responds as if the lemon juice is there. Right? And it's not that you're thinking, oh, here comes some lemon juice, I better start salivating, right? It happens at to use a Freudian term, an unconscious level, at a kind of an implicit level. It doesn't require purposeful thought for these things to happen. And one of the reasons we believe that is because we can condition people to do things, and they won't know why they're doing what they're doing. If you've ever seen that episode of The Office, Jim does that to Dwight, where he boots up his computer and offers him a mint, kind of related thing. But also the fact that we can do this with lower order animals that aren't thought to be capable of higher order cognition. Right? They're not capable of thinking the way we think. It's our belief. So this happens at a kind of a very basic, unconscious level. And then if you want to get fancy, you can, once you've established that condition stimulus condition response relationship, that pairing, learning has occurred, you can introduce another neutral stimulus before the other condition stimulus, and then it becomes a condition stimulus. And so you clap, and then the bell, and you're going to salivate. And at this point, you're salivating because of the bell, because that's a condition stimulus. If we do that enough times, we can take away the bell and just do the clap, and now the clap will elicit salivation. Which is higher order conditioning or second order conditioning. And second order conditioning, higher order conditioning is interesting because conceivably you could continue to go out to higher and higher levels, which means that the original kind of biological response and stimulus pairing, and what that is, and then how you elicit that response now, by some other conditioned stimulus, can be pretty far removed. Right? Which means that we may not understand why our heart rate increases when we see a person that looks a certain way, right? Or hear a certain sound, because that stimulus has been so far removed from the original unconditioned stimulus. Okay. Some other interesting aspects of classical conditioning. If you repeatedly, so you establish this relationship between conditioned stimulus, conditioned response, ring the bell and you'll salivate. And that happens for a while. But if you don't go back and introduce the unconditioned stimulus, so in our example before, the lemon juice, you ring the bell, salivated, ring the bell, salivated. Do that enough times, and salivation will steadily decrease. You'll salivate less and less. So the conditioned response decreases in intensity and frequency until it becomes the response connection becomes extinct, and that's whenever ringing the bell, the conditioned stimulus, no longer elicits the conditioned response. So it loses its signal power. And the idea here is, again, at a very kind of unconscious, basic level, the body's figured out the lemon juice isn't coming. Right? Oh, there's that bell again. I used to, I thought that it meant lemon juice, and again, I say I thought, but I don't want you to think that there's kind of higher level cognition going here. But just the idea that that signal has been found to be unreliable, and so now there won't be the response. Okay. But we often do see some other things like an extinction burst. So right before extinction occurs, you may actually see an increase in the conditioned response. So the example I always give for this is if you've used a vending machine before, you put your money in, hit the button, and the thing comes out. And there's a degree of kind of conditioning goes there that you hit the button and you expect the thing to come out, the Coke, the candy, whatever. Now sometimes you put your money in, push the button, and the thing doesn't come out. So what do? You push the button again. Just one more time. And then you may hit it rapidly 10 more times, and then you'll stop. Right? That's kind of the extinction burst thing where you thought that this stimulus would lead to this experience, but it doesn't. So you do it a bunch more just to make sure, and then you give up. So again, if you don't reintroduce that unconditioned stimulus, eventually the relationship will die. It will go extinct. But there's another interesting phenomenon called spontaneous recovery, where say we did the bell, lemon juice, saliva, bell, lemon juice, saliva, and then bell, and saliva. Eventually, you stop salivating, which ring the bell, and it no longer has power. And then one day, you're walking the street, maybe it's the holidays, and you're walking by the Salvation Army, and they're ringing their bell, and you start salivating. What the hell? Like out of nowhere. But again, if people don't go back to introducing lemon juice paired with the bell at some point, it will go back to being extinct again. But we do see this phenomenon sometimes where the pairing has been lost, it's gone extinct, but there'll be spontaneous recovery out of nowhere, and then it will go extinct again, which is just an interesting phenomenon. Some other things, stimulus generalization, stimulus discrimination. Stimulus generalization is about the idea that you might respond to a new stimulus in a way similar to the response produced by an established conditioned stimulus. We ring a bell and you salivate, and then somebody plays a key on a piano, which is similar in tone to the bell, but not the same stimulus. It's different in terms of the wavelength or whatever. But you still salivate. If that happens, if the other stimulus was similar enough to the conditioned stimulus to generate a response, the conditioned response, then you've had stimulus generalization, right? So if say you were really frightened one time while driving, and there was a red pickup in your rearview mirror. Right. So every time you see a red pickup, you have a fear response, right? Because your fear of maybe you were driving really fast, weaving, about to go off a cliff, whatever. You had some fear that was related to some real death experience, but that fear experience was paired with a neutral stimulus of a red truck, and now the red truck becomes a conditioned stimulus. Every time you see a red truck, you get afraid. Right? So stimulus generalization is now you see a red Suburban or a red car or a maroon truck, so something that's slightly different, but there's a stimulus generalization. You still get the conditioned response from a similar but different stimulus. The opposite side of that would be stimulus discrimination, and this is where, and usually it occurs after over time, where you will only respond to a certain stimuli and not to others. So maybe, and usually it happens in a lab setting. So let's say we have the lemon juice in the bell, and then we do the thing on the piano, and you salivate. And then we go back to every other week, we pair the bell with the lemon juice. So we're keeping that from going extinct, but we never pair the piano with the lemon juice. Eventually that piano tone will become extinct, and you'll be able to discriminate. Okay, well, I've realized that the lemon juice only comes with the bell and not the piano, and so you're able to discriminate between which stimuli have a relationship and which which don't. So both of those processes occur where you generalize, so you respond to more stimuli, and there are also times whenever you respond to only particular stimuli, either just the one that was paired or ones that are most closely similar to that one. There's a discriminatory process that goes on. And again, all of this at a very kind of basic level. And when I say basic, I mean we can even demonstrate conditioning processing occurring in the spinal cord, with no brain activity involved whatsoever. Just kind of neurons in the spinal cord can be classically conditioned to respond to these kind of associations. That being said, this is very basic and very powerful, and there's all kinds of things you can demonstrate, kind of cool stuff you can do to people in terms of classical conditioning, but there are limitations to what you can learn, and it seems to be we're biologically predisposed to learn some associations, some pairings, easier than others. With the one assumption being that it's because we're genetically prepared to form certain associations due to kind of evolutionary processes. And one of the examples we talk about is it's trying to condition somebody to be afraid of some stimulus. So you're making them afraid and then pairing their fear experience with some neutral stimulus. And somebody who's never seen a snake before, never seen a flower before, and usually this is a lab animal because it's hard to do that to people, but they've never seen a snake, never seen a flower. Easier to make them afraid of a snake than it is to make them afraid of a flower. Even a picture of a snake versus a picture of a flower, the snake's easier. Right? They've never seen one before, never been in the wild, but that's easier. There's a biological predisposition. In terms of getting people to feel nauseous, pairing that with some stimulus, we give them something that makes them feel nauseous, and then we repeatedly pair that with, either a certain taste or, a light going off. The taste pairing with nausea, much easier to learn than the light pairing with nausea, right? Which again makes sense from an evolutionary adaptive perspective that, if you're eating berries and they make you sick, you learn not to eat those berries, right? But if you're eating berries and it happens to be bright that day and you get sick, you don't only eat in the dark, right? It wouldn't make sense. So some things are easier to learn than others. So conditioning has its limits. And then the other type of conditioning, operant conditioning, which let me go back one sec, actually. One thing I want to talk about, just kind of to relate this to personality. An example, I was thinking of my, because a lot of stuff we talk about is obviously, lab rats and dogs and pigeons and salivating, but kind of a personality application for this. My one of my nephews, he has a thing for hair, likes to run his fingers through people's hair, and my own personal theory is that it's because of kind of a classical conditioning process that happened with him. When he was a baby, his mother had very long hair. Whenever she was holding him, especially whenever she was feeding him, she put her hair, she would lean down and put it all over his face, and he could reach up and play with it. So what's possible is that the pleasurable feelings associated with feeding and being held close to a warm body were associated with that neutral stimulus of hair, right? And so now, whenever he comes in contact with people's hair, he experiences these inner feelings of warmth and comfort and nurturance. So he might be a barber someday or a hairdresser. I don't know. I just kind of wanted to throw out that example real quick of one way classical conditioning might relate to a more kind of personality variable type thing. Okay, operant conditioning. A lot of it's based on Thorndike's work and his proposed law of effect, which sounds really simple, but it was revolutionary at the time. And the law of effect basically is whether or not a response, a behavior will be strengthened or weakened depends on the consequence that follows. So if it's satisfying or unsatisfying. So whenever you do something, the likelihood that you do that thing again is going to go up if the result of doing that behavior was satisfying, and if the result of doing that behavior was unsatisfying, you're not going to do it again. Right? That seems pretty simple, but again, revolutionary at the time. So servant is kind of the foundation for operant conditioning, and with operant conditioning we talk about two major processes. Punishment and reinforcement, right? And both of which can be positive or negative. So positive and negative punishment. Punishment is any time where the consequence of a behavior makes the behavior less likely to occur again. Right? Whatever it is, it could be getting a spanking, going to timeout, getting $1 million. Right? So getting $1 million, really, that could be a punishment. Maybe if it makes whatever you're doing decrease in frequency, then yeah, according to the way they define things, that would be punishment. Right? Anything that decreases the frequency or the likelihood of behavior reoccurring is a punishment. Now, the positive versus negative thing is positive is the consequence is presented, and negative is a consequence something's taken away. Right? So positive punishment is usually whenever you're doing something aversive to somebody. So spanking, applying electric shock. People are trying to break a habit and they wear a rubber band on their wrist, and every time they cuss, they snap themselves with a rubber band. That's positive punishment. They're presenting an aversive stimulus to decrease the likelihood that a behavior is repeated. Right? So negative punishment is taking something away. And obviously, negative is opposite of positive, so you're not going to take away something bad. You're not going to say, okay, I'm not going to spank you, that's your punishment. No. If you're going to take something away, instead of giving something bad, you're going to take away something good, right? So getting grounded in some ways is a negative punishment. So I'm taking away your freedom to make it less likely you're going to sneak out of the house. Right? Response cost. Anybody who's familiar with the kind of CBT terms? I'm taking away your Xbox or whatever. I'm taking away some positive thing that because you did this behavior. Right? That would be negative punishment. Okay. And they study punishment, but one of the things they found through studying is that it's not as good as reinforcement. It has some serious limitations, especially in terms of child rearing and training children in the way that you want them to become. One, because it doesn't teach good behavior, right? So if a child is misbehaving and you spank them, they know that something they were doing is wrong, right? And maybe you told them exactly what it was. Oh, you guys spanking because you did this. Okay, now I know not to do that. I know not to, pull my sister's hair when we're standing in line at the bank. Okay, so how about poke her in the back? How about, they don't until you punish every bad behavior, they may not figure out what the good behavior is. Right? So punishing doesn't teach good behavior. It only teaches what behaviors are bad or are off limits. And so it may take a lot of more trial and error to they figure out the good thing. Okay, fine, I'm not getting punished for this. This must be okay. Right? The other things, punishment does, when we talk about social learning theory a little bit, it may involve modeling or teaching by example that violence is good and justified as long as you're bigger and stronger than the other person. And whoever's kind of the might makes right. And if that's your value system, then that's not a limitation of punishment. That fits right in. But if that's not your value system, then that would be a limitation. And the other thing is that there may be kind of unintended associations. Think about kind of classical conditioning here. Whenever you're doing this operant conditioning, such that the pain, the humiliation, perhaps the shame associated with the spanking might become associated with a formally neutral stimulus or positive stimulus, the parent, such that when they see you, now they feel shameful about themselves or embarrassed or hurt. And that may not be an association that you want them to form in their mind. Fortunately, reinforcement works really, really well at shaping behavior, at changing how people behave. And reinforcement is the opposite. It's whenever a response becomes more likely following a consequence. So any consequence that increases the likelihood of a behavior is reinforcement. And again, you think, okay, so getting $1,000,000, that'd be reinforcing. Maybe getting a spanking, is that reinforcing? Maybe. For some kids, it might be. If they do the behavior more after they're spanked, then the spanking was a reinforcer. Right? And again, it can be positive or negative. Typically, we think about positive reinforcement. It's the easiest one to think about. That's your simple kind of reward. So you do some behavior, and you get there's some consequence, there's some outcome that's pleasing. Sometimes we talk about appetitive responses at a kind of animal level. So giving a dog a treat kind of thing. But anything given that's good, that's pleasing, that's satisfactory, is a reinforcer. Now that behavior is more likely to occur again. Negative reinforcement, again, is taking something away. So again, we're not going to take away something good, because we take away something good, that's negative punishment. So negative reinforcement is taking away something bad, right? And there's two ways that negative reinforcement works. One is avoidance learning, and the other is escape learning. Escape learning is one usually we talk about in terms of in the studies. They'll have a rat that they're electrocuting a little bit. An electrical grid under their feet that's turned on, and they learn if you push this button, that electrical grid gets turned off. Right? So you learn very quickly to push that button. They like pushing that button. They'll push that button a lot. Right? And they weren't punished, right? They didn't get electrocuted for pushing the button. That would be punishment. Then you wouldn't push the button. Right? They're being reinforced for pushing the button by taking away this aversive stimulus, which makes them more likely to push the button. So that's negative reinforcement, even though it seems like, oh, that sounds punishing. There's electrocution, but yeah, the electrocution is being taken away, not given. Right? So that's escape learning. You take away some aversive thing. Just like parents that learn to give in to their children. That's usually negative reinforcement. So a kid is whining, I want chocolate milk, I want chocolate milk, I want chocolate milk, no, I want juice, and they go back and forth. But they want something. And maybe they've already had enough to drink and they're about to go to bed, and you don't want to change the diaper in 2 hours. So you say no, but they keep whining louder and louder and louder. And then if you give in, fine. Okay, one, you've reinforced their behavior, but we're not talking about them right now. Your behavior, right? What just happened? There was something aversive, their whining, which you were able to take away. So there's a removal of an aversive stimulus from this certain behavior, and the behavior is giving in, which makes giving in more likely in the future. So you're less likely to hold your ground in the future, and you've been negatively reinforced. Oh, I feel so much better now that I've given in. I'm just going to give in much faster next time, which is probably a good idea. But in that example, we also see the child's behavior being reinforced, right? And they're being positively reinforced for whining. If I whine enough, I'll finally get this chocolate milk, right? Okay. So that's one example, kind of thing about personality. Another one we think about punishment and reinforcement would be how people learn to become aggressive. Right? So there's a lot of things that can go into becoming aggressive. So for punishment, we got to think about, okay, not so much that you're not being punished for being aggressive. So, but what could people get punished for that would then make them be more aggressive? So basically, it's the opposite behavior of aggression. So punishing people for cooperating and for being passive. So if there's a little boy playing basketball with his friends, and somebody steals the ball and goes and makes a layup, and his dad yells, "Son, you gonna let him do that to you?" And then "No, Dad." And then it happens again. Said, "Son, you're a sissy. You got to play rough. What are you doing?" Now the child is being punished for being passive, for not fighting back, right? So that should decrease the amount of passivity, which could possibly increase aggression later, right? But if you really want to increase aggression, right, anytime you want to increase a behavior, look to reinforcement. So how can we increase aggression via positive or negative reinforcement? One of the obvious things would be positive reinforcement. Aggression can get you what you want, right? So if some other kid has lunch money and you forgot yours, if you punch them in the nose and get their lunch money, oh, now I have this thing and I like this thing, I can buy some lunch, I'm going to do that again, right? Your violence, your aggression has been reinforced if it works for you. Versus some other kid who, hey, I want that lunch money. I want to punch this kid in the nose, and then the other kid punches them back, and they don't get the lunch money. Now that's not reinforcing, right? Now I've been punished. So I'm going to be less aggressive because it didn't work for me. So people who are aggressive adults may be ones who were successful at being aggressive children. Successful in terms of there were rewarding consequences. Again, for getting stuff, for being praised for their aggression. Think about negative reinforcement. Think about the kid who's getting picked on and feeling shameful and sad and mad and angry about getting picked on, and then one day the kid says, "I've had enough," and beats the crud out of some other kids that were picking on him or her. Now that all those shameful feelings and the anger and the fear of getting taunted might go away. So if we're taking away that aversive stimulus by being aggressive, now it's more likely I'm going to be aggressive. There's negative reinforcement contributing to aggression. But it's not that simple, like anything else. And one of the wrinkles in here is the idea of a discriminant stimulus. And this is the idea that a certain behavior won't always elicit the same consequence. So aggression won't always elicit a reward. And what we learned via trial and error, according to the behaviors, is that only in certain conditions, so if this particular stimulus is present or is of this quality, then my aggression will work. But if it's not present or if it's different, then my aggression won't work. So you learn to discriminate about the likelihood of the consequence based on some other stimulus. So again, with aggression, it could be, okay, kids that are smaller than me, I've learned that aggression works and I get the lunch money. Kids that are bigger than me, I learned that no, I won't get the lunch money, so I'm not going to be aggressive with those kids. So size of the other child of my victim is a discriminant stimulus, such that I will only show aggression in a certain circumstance, because I've learned that I get rewards if this stimulus is present, and I get punishments if it's this other stimulus. One of the other interesting things we know about operant conditioning is that it matters how you get reinforced. We talk about schedules of reinforcement, and you can have continuous or partial schedules of reinforcement. Right? Continuous reinforcement is every time you do the behavior, you get the same consequence. Right? And that would be the one that leads to a very quick learning curve, high rate of responding, slow to extinguish. I'm sorry, not that slow to extinguish, but a quick learning curve. But if you do a behavior and every time you do it, you get the same response, and then one day you stop getting that response, it won't take you too long to stop doing it because it's been so regular. Wow, something's changed, right? Versus partial schedules, particularly a variable ratio schedule, where sometimes I get the reward, sometimes I don't. Right? That one, it takes a little longer to learn that association, but it's very resistant to extinction, and there's a high rate of responding. Because again, the idea that, okay, once it stops, you're no longer going to be rewarded for it. but you're going to keep doing it because, well, sometimes I don't get rewarded. I better do it some more. Eventually, it's going to pay off because, yeah, last time it took me 10 times. The time before that was 8. The time before that was 12. Somewhere around here, it's going to happen. And so it takes longer to extinguish that learning association. The example I was talking about here would be slot machines, right? If a slot machine paid off every time, which we call that an ATM machine. When you go to an ATM machine, you put your card in, and no money comes out. Well, you're going to call the bank, but you're not going to go back to that ATM machine the next day and try again, and the next day and try again, and the next day try again. Unless again some other discriminant stimulus in the area, a sign that says out of order has changed. But otherwise, you're going to say, okay, this machine's broken, and until somebody fixes it, I'm not going back there. Now, a slot machine, you put some money in, you pull the thing. No money comes out. You do it again, no money comes out. You may do it 20 times, and no money ever comes out, and the slot machine may be broken. But you're going to keep putting money in because you had experience of every once in a while it pays off. Right? So there's some interesting influences of different schedules of reinforcement on both the rate at which something is learned and the time how long it takes for extinction to occur after the consequence changes. Last thing I want to talk about in terms of operant conditioning would be shaping and chaining, two related ideas. I think your book talks about shaping, but not chaining. Shaping is where you're rewarding successive approximations of a target behavior. So if you want your dog to get you a beer from the fridge, you reward the dog first whenever they step toward the kitchen. Here you go. And then you do that a couple times until they reliably go to the kitchen. But then you stop doing that because they start to go to the kitchen and they stop. And then maybe they'll come back toward you and nothing happens. Okay, but now they go toward the kitchen and take another few steps closer to the fridge. Okay, you get rewarded again. And now I'm going to reward that step in the chain. And I'm not going to reward you again for just moving toward the kitchen once. So once I kind of establish that one step, now I'm going to stop rewarding at that level. And I'm not going to reward you until you get closer to the target behavior, which is bringing me a beer out of the fridge. And so the dog pulls the fridge open. Now I'm going to reward that. I'm going to stop rewarding other stuff. And all the way down to finally the dog brings you a beer, and the dog only gets a reward for bringing you a beer. And that was kind of the target behavior. That would be shaping, which is a process that's used to teach some more complex behaviors. Because again, with operant conditioning, it's different than class conditioning because it's not that you're getting them to do something. In class conditioning, there's a stimulus which you can manipulate and then a response. With operant conditioning, your intervention doesn't come until they exhibit the behavior. So you can't reward or punish the behavior until it occurs. So you gotta wait till randomly they'd happen to do the behavior you're trying to get them to do. And that's where shaping comes in, because if they get close, I'll reward that, and then they get closer, and I can move them toward this desired behavior. Chaining is similar, a little different. It's whenever the target behavior is actually a multi-step target, and you reward each step. But each step is important, not just the final one. So if you want your dog to get you a beer, open the beer, turn on the TV, and recline your chair, you would still do this kind of successive approximations, but you still reward all the other levels because you want them to do all the things. If you did the successive approximations like you did in shaping, they would just end up reclining your chair and not doing the other stuff. Right? So they have to learn that each step is important in chaining, versus shaping is just that end point. Okay, so we talked about the conditioning theories. Now moving on to social learning theory, which the social learning theories. I don't know why your book doesn't really mention this, but they really owe a lot of their thinking and their ideas to the work of Lev Vygotsky and other individuals who worked in a slightly different field. Vygotsky studied how people come to know things, right? So development of cognition, right? Which is a slightly different branch of behavioral science. But one of the things he really talked a lot about was the role of interpersonal interactions and culture in the learning process. And his ideas were very influential on some people in kind of the behaviorist camp, who weren't quite comfortable with this very, to some degree, oversimplified, rat in a maze kind of paradigm. It's like, well, people aren't rats, and people are affected by other things out in the world. And Vygotsky and some other folks talked about that, about how learning, which conditioning is all about, learning occurs in a context and involves interactions with other individuals. So with that kind of background, people like Rotter expanded behaviorism to include a social context, right? So try to get away from this idea that we go through life aimlessly exhibiting behaviors until they're rewarded or punished, right? So that we can learn what to do. But there's more complex stuff going on here, and really largely they introduced a cognitive component. Rotter talked about expectancies and reinforcement value. It's the idea that for any given situation, there are different possible behavioral outcomes. Any situation, there are different things you could do, right? And what you do depends on, according to Rotter, two things. One, what you expect with regard to being rewarded or punished. Okay, so if I do this thing, something good will happen, or something bad will be taken away, or something bad will happen, something good will be taken away, whatever. So you have expectations for each behavior, and then how important is it to you to get rewarded or avoid being punished for that behavior? And in terms of the expectancies, felt that there's an expectancy for each situation, but we also have these generalized expectancies. We talked about locus of control, that people can be placed on this kind of spectrum in terms of internal or external locus of control with regard to the idea that people differ with regard to how much they believe that the rewards or punishments are within their own control, right? Which hopefully you think, that sounds like a trait. Yes, it does. Locus of control is a trait, and it is consistent with trait theory, with the idea that people can be higher or lower on this behavioral tendency or cognitive tendency. Okay, so it's basically either you think, I can control my behavior, I can modify my behavior to get stuff, or no, I can't change how I am, or no, I can't affect the world around me. There's nothing I can do. Where are you at? And that people differed in kind of a stable way, being a trait, with regard to they had more of an internal locus of control or more of an external locus of control. But they also differed in terms of these reinforcement values, that things that were rewarding to, and some people say, well, if I do this, I'll get a big raise at work. The idea that that's not going to be equally reinforcing for all people. Right? For some people, that's of high reinforcement value. Yeah, I really want to get a raise at work. That'll be more money, more power, more prestige. Somebody else may say, a raise at work sounds like more responsibility, more work. I'll pass. Right? So they're different. Not all reinforcers are equal for all people. Okay, so we're getting some individual differences there. And then Bandura built on, I put Bandera, built on these ideas. So I was trying to figure out why I put Bandera instead of Bandura. That's a typo. I must be thinking about going to the hill country. But Bandura, sorry, talked about his theory being a social cognitive theory, which when you read this book, it's a little confusing. You see social learning theory and the social cognitive theory, and it's like, well, are those really that different? No, social learning theory, as Rotter wrote about it, was also a social cognitive theory. He just didn't use that term. Bandura wanted to make sure, he really wanted to emphasize that, cognition is an important piece of this. And part of that's kind of political, historical stuff going on within psychology. But basically the idea that, okay, yeah, you strict behaviorists, you're here. We like some of that stuff, but we feel you're missing out on some stuff, and you're missing out on these cognitions that you say can't be observed and can't be studied and aren't scientific. They can be studied. You just got to be clever. So I'm going to put that in the name of my theory just to make sure you know that this is distinct from the stuff that Watson and Skinner and Thorndike, some of those people are doing. But all social learning theories really have a cognitive component. Okay, so one of the things related to his cognitive component was this idea of reciprocal determinism. And basically, this is saying that behavior, environment, and internal factors, thoughts and feelings, all influence each other, right? Because the kind of strict behaviorist idea is that environment influences behavior, and that's it. And then you might go one step further and say, okay, well, environment influences behavior, and behavior influences environment. So you get punished for doing something, you're less likely to do it, which will then cause you to seek out environments where you're less likely to get punished. Right? So that's behavior, environment going back and forth. But reciprocal determinism added this other part, right, which is internal personal cognitive factors. So in the example we have illustrated here, talking about bungee jumping. So if the likelihood that somebody's going to learn to bungee jump will be influenced by the number of bungee jumping friends they have. Right? So the arrow goes from environment to behavior. But it also goes the other way, right? If you decide to learn to bungee jump, you're going to meet more people that like to bungee jump. So you're going to have more bungee jumping friends, which will then possibly influence your behavior of learning to bungee jump. And that's that behavior environment. And now we'll look at the top part, liking high-risk activities. So it could be that, well, yeah, I like risky things. I like taking chances. Adrenaline junkie. And if I am, then I'm more likely to pursue bungee jumping. But also, I'm more likely to find friends who like to do high-risk things. One of those may be bungee jumping. So my kind of how I think about the world may influence my friends, which may influence my behavior. Or how I think about things may just influence my behavior directly, which may influence my friends. Or the behavior could influence the thinking, right? So it could be that you had a bunch of friends who liked to bungee jump. You weren't too crazy about it, but they convinced you to do it. So you learned, you did it, you did the behavior, and doing the behavior, you found out, well, holy crap, I do like this. I do like high-risk activities. And so it influences your cognitive factors, which then I'm going to find some more friends that bungee jump, and I'm going to learn more about bungee jumping. Right? So the idea that the arrows go back and forth, and all three things are connected. They're part of an interlocking system, this reciprocal system, which is elegant in many ways, and more consistent with the complexity of human experience than a simple environment influences your behavior way of thinking. Okay. Another thing that Bandura talked about is self-regulation. The idea that we aren't like trained seals that only exhibit behavior when rewards are given, and then stop when they aren't. But really, mostly throughout the day, we regulate our own behaviors with internal rewards and punishments. We have ideas and values, things we aspire to. We get upset with ourselves for doing certain things and feel good about ourselves for doing other things. And so we're not reliant on, some scientist giving us a piece of cheese. But we have these internal mechanisms of rewards and punishments. And then the other big contribution from Bandura is the whole idea of observational learning. And this is, again, one thing that in some ways separates us from at least some animals. Monkeys can do this too. Of course, they're in many ways not that different than us. But the idea that we don't have to experience the punishment or the reinforcer to have the learning occur for us. If we see somebody else experience it, so vicarious reinforcement, vicarious punishment, we can learn from that. You see somebody walking down the street and they step in a hole and they fall down. If you're walking down the street 2 days later, you're not gonna fall in the hole, right? You're gonna walk around it. You learned by watching. So you didn't have to get punished to change your behavior. You're able to see somebody else's behavior. And there's a lot of research on this we don't have time to go into, but I'll say briefly that we tend to imitate behaviors that are rewarded. But the likelihood of imitation is strongly related to our perception of the model. So the person who we're watching, they're modeling some behavior, they're acting some way and getting rewarded or punished. The degree to which we'll try to be like them depends on how we perceive them. And one of the factors, I'll just say, is the degree of similarity we see between ourselves and them. Somebody we see as being very different than us, we see them getting rewarded for doing a certain thing. We say, well, I'm not like that at all. Then I'm not going to try doing that because I see them as different from me. If I see somebody who I see being very much like me, getting all this good stuff for doing this behavior, I'm probably going to try that behavior as well. Okay, so we've covered the basic theories, conditioning theories, and social learning. We'll talk a little bit now about application, psychological disorders. The applications of behaviorism and social learning are vast, and I could spend a whole semester talking about this, but just talk about two things. One, phobias. The establishment and maintenance of phobias in some instances can be understood from the perspective of conditioning theory. The establishment of phobias thought to be related to classical conditioning. So at some point in time, you were having if you have a phobia, the phobic person is having a fear response, and a fear response, that's a cognitive, emotional, physiological experience where thoughts of being afraid, increased heart rate, subjective feeling of fear or terror, right? And usually there's something scary that's causing that in the world, right? And that's something that we're biologically trained to do, to motivate us to engage in behavior that will, get rid of the fear-causing stimulus, right? Fight or flight, right? So you see a bear and you get scared because bears are scary. But we're not talking about a bear phobia, but the idea for classical conditioning is that there's a bear and you get scared, but right before you saw the bear, you heard Yellow Submarine playing on the radio. Totally harmless song, doesn't really affect you, but that chorus is going, and then you see the bear, you get really scared. And now every time you hear a Beatles song, because you have the stimulus generalization, every time you hear a Beatles song, you get scared. And so now you think somebody's playing the Beatles, you turn it off, and you avoid anybody playing the Beatles because you freak out. And the idea with phobias is that usually people don't remember or maybe even be aware of that this has happened, right? And they'll just find, a week later, they hear a Beatles song, oh my God, I'm freaking out. What's that about? And they don't make the connection between, hearing the Beatles song before, because they may not even have noticed it, right? It wasn't really capturing their attention because there was a bear. So the idea, that's how phobias could be established via classical conditioning, so that you get afraid of something real, but then that fear becomes associated with something else in the environment that just happened to be paired with the scary thing, the unconditioned stimulus. But if that happens, especially if it's a Beatles song, what should happen, right? You hear Beatles songs enough on the radio that you keep hearing Beatles songs, you get scared. But as long as you don't hear a Beatles song and another bear comes out at you, right? So we don't repair the unconditioned stimulus with the unconditioned response, or unconditioned stimulus with the conditioned stimulus. We don't repair Yellow Submarine with a bear again. Eventually, you should experience extinction, and probably fairly quickly or something like that, right? So you're no longer afraid. Like the first time you hear it, you get afraid, but then, well, that was weird, but there's no bear. The next time you hear it, a little bit afraid, not much, and then the third time, nothing at all. Wow, I wonder why I was so scared that one time when I heard that song. Right? Extinction should occur. Why doesn't extinction occur? The thinking is because of operant conditioning. So the thinking goes that the phobia is established, right? You're afraid of Beatles songs now. So now, whenever you hear the first few bars of a Beatles song, you turn it off. Or you walk around the corner and you see a poster of the Beatles, and you turn and you walk the other way. So you start to feel a little afraid, but then you change your behavior to get away from that phobic stimulus, right? And when you do, your little bit of fear goes away, and you feel better. So now that little bit of fear has gone away. We've taken away an aversive stimulus to make your avoidance more likely. Now I'm gonna, I feel better, so now I'm more likely to stay away from Beatles songs, more likely to change the channel. So my avoidance has been negatively reinforced, and because it's been negatively reinforced, I'm gonna avoid more. And if I always avoid that stimulus, I always avoid Beatles songs, extinction can never occur. Because extinction only occurs whenever you get that conditioned stimulus multiple times without the unconditioned stimulus paired with it again. But if I never let myself hear a Beatles song again, it will always have that power. Right? And so, not surprisingly, a lot of the treatments for phobias and some other anxiety disorders involve exposure. There's exposure component where, oh, you're scared of this? Okay, here it is, and we're going to make you see it. And we know, and, you're going to play a Beatles song, and you can't turn it off. And you think, well, that sounds mean. Yeah, it may be, but again, it's for the greater benefit. With the idea being that if we can sit and make you listen to this Beatles song once, maybe twice, and no bear runs into the office, eventually it will stop having that signal power to cause anxiety, and you will experience extinction, and that's precisely what happens. And that's kind of the backbone of treating phobias, and also to some degree PTSD, where we expose people to the memory of a traumatic event, so that memory loses its power to cause anxiety. The other thing I want to talk about related to psychological disorders in these learning theories is withdrawal behavior. If someone is experiencing interpersonal conflict, not getting along with somebody in a relationship, romantic relationship perhaps, they may withdraw, they may pull away behaviorally and emotionally from that person. And when they do, the conflict ceases and they feel better. Right? So now their withdrawal behavior has been reinforced. They're more likely to withdraw because the bad feeling went away. So again, negative reinforcement. And you think, oh, well, that's good, they feel better. But what's happened is now they may withdraw from other relationships. They may have some kind of generalization of that phenomenon. And we know that isolation, once you cut off contact with lots of people, isolation is now a risk factor for depression. And so, not surprisingly, one of the kind of behavioral treatments for depression is go out there and do stuff and be with people. And the idea that you don't want to, right? Because you've had these conditioned responses where these learning experiences where it's not rewarding. But the behavior says, go to this experience, and even though you don't think it's going to be fun, keep doing it until it is fun. With the supposition being that social experiences are inherently rewarding, and obviously you don't want to tell them, go hang out with this person who's a jerk. Tell them to hang out with nice, friendly people. Even though they may be scared of that, getting them to make themselves do it until the rewards can kick in. Okay, so lots of stuff to talk about in terms of psychological disorders in behaviorism and learning theory, obviously. And a related this idea of behavior modification, which may be a part of therapy, may be used for psychological disorders, but can also be used for just people that have habits they want to change. And it can be kind of a do-it-yourself thing, or something you do with a professional, but basically it involves designing a program of rewards and punishments associated with a certain target behavior or behaviors. One thing we know about behavior modification is that it's more effective when a professional is involved than when you try to do it yourself. It can be very effective at modifying a behavior. And sometimes people want to do it themselves. I'm trying to quit smoking, I'm trying to eat different foods, and they have somebody help them design a program. But generally, behavior modification is most frequently used with people who don't get much say in the matter. So kids, patients in psychiatric facilities, and prisoners, right? People who have less freedom to where you can manipulate their environment, and you have control over the rewards and punishments that happen to them. Other people, adults who aren't incarcerated or institutionalized, you can't. It's harder to manipulate their world. So usually it's people that have less freedom, but it works really well. and especially with some populations that other approaches are less realistic. So somebody who's got a pretty severe level of mental retardation that has their cognitive capacity is such that talking to them about a certain behavior, maybe they're doing some self-injurious behavior, banging their head against the wall, trying to talk to them about why are you banging your head against the wall, that doesn't feel good, is not going to work because they're not going to understand. You're not going to be able to communicate at the level necessary to bring about any behavior change. But giving them rewards, candy or smokes if it's an adult, whatever, when they're not headbanging, and taking those things away when they do headbang can lead to a decrease in the headbanging behavior, which is, again, for their benefit, even though you are in some ways manipulating them. But it works really well. It's very powerful and it can be very effective. But sometimes there's a lack of response. Generalization says that maybe you have a kid in class who's talking in class and getting in trouble. So you design a behavior modification program to get them to stop talking in class. And maybe you do, but if you're not a very good therapist, you'll focus mainly on punishment, and you'll be successful at getting them to not talk in class. But then now they'll just do something else. Now they'll write notes in class, and you've got to design a different thing. So what you want to do with behavior modification to be successful is, again, focus on reinforcement. So not so much on getting somebody to not do something, but get them to do something else that's incompatible with the problematic behavior. So, for example, somebody wants to quit smoking. If they figure out that they always smoke whenever they're stressed, reward them for any time that they're stressed. They chew on jelly beans, right? Because hard to smoke while you're chewing on jelly beans. It's an incompatible behavior. But if you can get them reward that behavior to increase that one, and it gets in the way of the other one, then that other behavior may fade, and you've successfully modified their behavior. Okay. Other applications in terms of Ben Durer talks about efficacy expectations, right? The idea that you must believe you can do something before you really try to do it, and that the best way to get somebody to believe that they can do something is to have them do it, which obviously not always possible if they don't believe they can do it. So one of the things that we may do, and that Ben talks about, is using something like guided mastery, where you're assisting the person with successive approximations of the target behavior. And you see this a lot with kids, young children, trying to learn a skill, and use kind of hand-over-hand technique, where you're trying to teach a kid to use a fork. And you put the fork in their hand, and you put your hand over their hand, closed around the fork, and you put it in the food, and it goes in their mouth, and you go, "Yay, you fed yourself!" They didn't feed themselves. You did it, but you're guiding them, and then you, as you go along, you guide less and less, and let them do the behavior themselves more and more. But whenever they can't do it themselves, you're helping them, right? You're providing some support, some crutches, which again goes back to Vygotsky. So guided mastery, and then something your book doesn't talk about, but it's relevant here, is motivational interviewing, which was a series of techniques originally developed to work with people who had addictions, I think nicotine addiction originally, but used much more broadly now in psychotherapy. And it's a technique to increase the motivation for change. And it's related to efficacy expectations, because the idea is that your first goal with people that need to change some behavior is to address their the mindset regarding the desirability of change and the possibility of change. And before you can do that, and you have to kind of meet them where they're at, before you can do that, even if you have the best therapy, best drugs, whatever in the world, it's not going to matter, because you have to get them to want to change and to believe that it's possible and even likely. And once you can get that, then the rest of it's that's easy. Okay. In terms of assessment, generally from behaviorist point of view, whenever you're gathering any kind of assessment about behavior, usually you're interested in some target behavior or behaviors, but you're interested in this chain, right? The ABC, the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. So this behavior we're interested in, either something somebody's doing really well, or more usually something that's a problematic behavior, hair pulling, their own hair, fighting at school, whatever. Okay, well, I'm going to go observe. I'm going to look for that behavior, and then I'm going to find out what happened right before that. What was the antecedent? Both in terms of what were they doing, what were the people doing around them, what was the weather like, what was the time of day, what are all the setting events before that behavior, and then what's the consequence of the behavior. Right? If the antecedent, one thing I'm thinking is, okay, well, what are the discriminant stimuli that may be here that, okay, whenever they only are aggressive whenever they're around much smaller kids. Okay, so now I've figured out part of their pattern. Smaller kids are their discriminant stimuli versus bigger kids. But then also I want to look at the consequence. What happens when they do this thing? What kind of rewards or punishments do they experience? And you have to be able to think very flexibly about what might be a reinforcer for a person when doing these observations. But the gold standard when doing assessment, data collection from a behaviorist point of view, is direct observation. You're going and seeing it yourself. But to be a good empiricist, you want to limit the amount of subjectivity and bias in your observations. So really, you want to get a couple people to observe with you, and then you can look at things like inter-rater reliability. So we're all looking for how many times the kid, right? Because usually we're doing children, we're doing direct observation. How many times the kid did this during this space of time? And I said 5 times, you said 6, you said 4. Okay, well, we're close. But you can figure out how close you are, and if you're not close, you got to go back and do some training with each other and figure out, okay, exactly what behavior are we looking for? And that's another kind of key component to behavior observation is usually the things you're looking for are very well defined. It's not, okay, I'm going to go observe and see if this kid is mean on the playground. That's not a behaviorist going out there. A behaviorist going out there is going to say, I will look for the number of times the child initiates physical contact with another child paired with a loud voice, or physical contact that causes another child to fall to the ground, or and they'll very clearly operationalize the behaviors they're looking at. So often not realistic to go out in the field, especially with a lot of people to observe. Fortunately, with the advances in technology and the recording technology in particular, with video equipment getting smaller and smaller, it's easier now to surreptitiously, unobtrusively record kids and other people that you need to observe to collect data, and then other people can watch it on film, and you can get your inter-rater reliability ratings. But again, that's usually done with kids, not so much with adults, because it's just awkward to go to somebody's office and watch them. So you might rely on self-observation, which some people talk about. Well, there are concerns about the validity of that. Are people really going to be honest with you? And you have to think about that when making sense of your data. But generally, if somebody's coming to see you for help, and you give them a self-observation, a self-monitoring assignment, if they're not interested in reporting the truth to you, then you're not going to help them anyway. So what's the point? And people who are interested in being helped will generally be honest and should be fairly valid. But one of the more interesting things about self-observation is that in addition to being a source of data, it sometimes serves as an intervention in and of itself. So for things like treating habit disorders like trichotillomania, which is this habitual kind of mindless pulling out of the hair, sometimes combined with eating the hair, not always, but more common in children than adults. One of the things you do when treating this and to gather data is you assign them to, okay, I want you to set your watch to go off every 20 minutes, every hour, whatever, and whenever it goes off, stop and write down if you're pulling out your hair or not. And you'll get good data, first of all, but the other thing is their hair pulling will decrease because they're paying attention to it, because this habit disorder, like a lot of habit disorders, are disorders that are fairly mindless. And if you increase your mindfulness, the amount of attention you're paying to it, the less you'll do it. It's like if you keep a food journal for a couple of weeks, you'll be surprised how much better you eat because you're writing down and paying, oh my God, I didn't realize I was eating 2 shakes and some French fries every other day. That's not good, right? And your behavior will change because you're observing it. Sometimes in kind of therapeutic directions. And you can also rely on observation by others. So having parents, spouses, friends, teachers, bosses, whatever, report on what they see of your behavior. And there is the possibility of bias. And bias kind of multiply defined. One, in terms of people purposely distorting what they report to you because they have some agenda. Generally not worried about that. More so just bias that the degree to which what they report is representative of what actually happened, right? Because what people see and what they understand is always filtered through their own world lens, right? Two people see the same behavior and they'll report it differently, and not because anyone's trying to lie, but just because they experienced it differently, right? We talked about Rogers before, that kind of phenomenological field. They have unique phenomenological fields, right? So there is a potential for bias, and so it's not surprising that when we get reports from others, we like to get it from multiple others, and not uncommon there are discrepancies. But if you're a psychologist or a therapist, usually you'll, oh, good, this is interesting. This isn't bad news for me. This is good news, because I don't think these people, one's lying, one's telling the truth. I think they see this behavior differently, and it's possible they see different behavior, especially if I'm looking at teacher and parent reports of a child's behavior. And mom, dad, and teacher may have three different views of the level of aggression or anxiety or depression that a kid is exhibiting, right? And some of that is because they have different expectations for what's normal. So if a kid is roughhousing while playing in a game with other kids, the dad may say, no, I don't see any aggression here, but the teacher say, yeah, very aggressive, right? Same behavior, they see the same behavior, but interpret it differently. Could be that. Also could be the kid is more or less aggressive, depressed, anxious in one setting than another. So it's all kind of important information. So those discrepancies, from a scientist's point of view, are maddening, because you like for there to be agreement, because then you can be confident that it's accurate. But from a therapist's point of view, those discrepancies are interesting and informative. Okay, so evaluating the behavioral social learning approach. The amount of empirical support is overwhelming, right? And not surprisingly, given that, as we said before, the field was really started and supported by academic psychologists, more so than some other fields. Psychodynamic. There are some academic Freudian, neo-Freudian people, but not nearly as many as are people that study would identify as cognitive psychologists, behavioral psychologists. So a lot more people doing research. It's easier to do research on, right? One of the reasons is you can do a lot of it with animals, right? Running rats through a maze and stuff. Not so much can you examine the id, the ego, and the superego, or archetypes among rats, right? Because it requires human subjects who can report verbally to study some of those other concepts. So easier to study, more people studying it. So a lot of empirical support for some of the ideas of behaviorism. The interventions based on this approach are very effective at behavior change. Right? We can get people to do a lot of things. People that seem unmanageable because of their maybe level of psychopathology or level of impairment in terms of intellectual functioning or emotional disturbance. If you can get sufficient control over their environment, in an inpatient facility, you can really control people's behavior, which in some ways is a little scary, but it's also just impressive. Another kind of positive, in my mind, especially of the behaviorist approach, is that it's moved away from a strict behaviorist approach, and there's that with Bandura, there's that incorporation of cognitive factors, and usually these cognitive factors being mediating factors, such that this behavior will result in this response, depending on what the person thinks, what interpretation the person makes of the behavior, what they expect the outcome to be, all those things. There's all these different cognitive mechanisms that can help explain why in the same exact situation with the same rewards, two people won't always act the same way, because people aren't, lab rats. They're more complicated. So I think you have to have that cognitive component in there. That being said, one of the criticisms leveled at behaviorism, more so at the kind of Watson-Skinner version of it than the more recent manifestations, is that it's an oversimplification of the human experience, and that there's no way we could explain all the variety of experiences and behaviors and preferences and personalities that exist in our world merely by saying, okay, well, there are these different combinations of rewards and punishments and conditioned stimuli. That it just doesn't make sense. And the other thing I said before, that the interventions for behavior change are very effective. They're very effective at changing behavior, but in many cases, the interventions only target symptoms. And somebody say, well, that's good, the symptoms are the problem. Maybe, and sometimes that's true, but sometimes the symptoms aren't the problem. They are, as the kind of name implies, symptoms of a problem. So we talked I think this class before about the it wasn't this class, was it? Sorry. But in another class, I talk about how, in the supernatural view of psychopathology back in the Dark Ages, attributing abnormal behavior to spiritual causes, demonic possession and stuff like that, that some of the treatments based on that worked. So, people, if they thought you were possessed and they held you over a pit of fire, then people would suddenly stop hearing voices, right? Cured. But they weren't cured. They didn't want to be barbecued, so they would say, yeah, I don't hear the voices anymore. They would still hear them, but they were cognitively with it enough to say, nope, I don't hear them, I'm good. To some degree, that can maybe go on with behaviorism, that by manipulating people's environments and rewards and punishments, we can see behaviors change where people will stop showing certain behaviors, but whatever's underlying problem was causing that behavior might not be addressed. So if somebody is a skin picker and they pick at their skin when they're anxious, and we punish them for skin picking and reward them for not skin picking, we can get rid of that behavior. But we might not have addressed the anxiety that underlies that, or figured out the cause of the anxiety. And a behavior would say, well, who cares? Your behavior is different. And if the symptom pops up, you stop picking at your skin and now you do something else, you have the symptom substitution, they would say, okay, well, now target that one. And keep targeting stuff until you don't have any problems. Which may work, but some people, and myself included, feel that you have to sometimes figure out the root problem and not just focus at behavioral manifestations of what may be more deeply rooted problems. Okay, that's all for now. Take care.